Welcome back everyone to part 2 of my werewolf guide. I'll be covering the more advanced stuff here and going deeper into both the gameplay and theory crafting. Do check out my other guide as well, which covers the core mechanics and basic stuff. And let's get started right away. In part 1, I strongly advocated for sorcerer as the preferred werewolf class, and I still do. But alternatives definitely exist. For example, Warden Werewolf, which you can see me playing here, has a lot more damage than sorcerer, if and only if you run a status effect build, due to this passive which grants over 2k weapon damage when buffed. It also has access to Ares Cry, probably one of the strongest sets right now, giving 10% multiplicative damage done, and based on experience, the proc itself also accounts for about 10% of my damage the entire fight, and it also has a good chance of proccing Sundered every 3 seconds. However, in every other way, Warden Werewolf is inferior. Outside of the class mastery passives, Warden literally only offers 2 passives that work in werewolf form, and one of them is not even that good, compared to Sorcerer, which has 8 passives, mostly very good ones. Warden Werewolf is a lot harder to play, especially in defense and sustain, since it lacks the crucial conservation passive that sorc has. Pretty much every single Warden Werewolf I've fought so far have struggled to sustain or heal, especially when caught in a bad spot. It is also terrible if you are outnumbered or unable to attack, since you heavily rely on keeping status effect up to take less damage and deal more damage. Dragonknight would be my recommendation instead if you do not wish to run sorc, since its passives are surprisingly good and is a pretty good middle ground between sorcerer and warden. Landslide and its class mastery also works in werewolf, and together they give over 20% damage done. Do take note that 10% damage done from landslide is additive, but the 10% from the mastery is multiplicative, aka potency done. As for the other mastery, I would recommend the block passive, since there's really not much else good to run, except wildfire embers, but then you have to equip Firebrand for that to work. And I think without Dragonknight abilities, building wildfire with just Firebrand takes way too long for it to be good. Also keep in mind that without conservation of energy from sorc, healing and sustain still won't be easy on Dragonknight. Subclass Werewolf also works surprisingly well, since you can cherry pick skill lines with the best passives. I recommend the following lines: Storm Calling, which gives regen, physical damage, and amplitude; Earthen Heart, which gives landslide, 3k armor, and a little bit of crit damage; and Adric Spear, which gives 6% damage and armor, as well as the Burning Light passive. Again, Sorcerer personally is still the best, and it is 100% what I'm going to be running next patch for open world. While conservation is a no-brainer, what should you pick for the other mastery for sorc werewolf? Static reverberation seems like the obvious choice, but note that its effectiveness is cut into 3 with the pack leader morph, since the wolves do count as pets. You'll probably be thinking, oh, that's easy, just run the other morph. But as explained in part 1, Berserker isn't worth it at all, since it just offers much less, and you also cannot sustain werewolf form without the direwolves. Static reverb is still a good choice even with this setback, simply because werewolf dishes out so many hits in 1 second. Therefore, when the enemy is low, the frequency of static proccing won't be too much less compared to a fully working passive. Also keep in mind, if you evaluate your fights using combat metrics, you may see that static reverberation only does like 2 to 3% of your damage, and you might think, oh, that's very little, it's not worth it. But do keep in mind that most of the time, static reverberation isn't doing much, but when the enemy is low, that's when it's going to proc a lot. So the 2 to 3% doesn't really reflect the true amount of damage percentage it does when the enemy is low. It's probably more like over 10% still, and that will really help you secure your kill. so just keep that in mind if you are evaluating your fights. Calculated defense, on the other hand, gives about a 8 to 10k damage shield for half a second in PvP every time you cast the Werewolf Fear, which is your only channeled skill. Almost all the time, the shield will break immediately and proc the 6% damage passive, which translates to over 200 damage. Also take note that the pounds Get Closer, not the close range version, can also proc calculated defense. Charging a heavy attack also procs it. And I especially like this passive because I think you are kind of vulnerable when casting Fear, especially if you get stunned before it goes off. So having a temporary damage shield during that definitely helps. Some experienced PvPers will be familiar with the concept of bash weaving, which is the technique of casting one or two bashes after you do a light attack into a skill to squeeze in a little bit more extra damage, usually just in the low hundreds, unless you are a bash build. And this works because bash isn't part of the global 1 second ability cooldown. Normally, bash weaving isn't worth it since it does cost a lot of stamina, but the extra damage can come in handy when going for a burst, and you can also block some attacks while doing so, which can keep you alive and also potentially prevent you from being interrupted by some CCs. As you can see, conservation of energy procs off any ability with a cost, including bash, roll, break free, but not block. Sorcerer Werewolf has a lot of sustain, so you can bash with impunity without running out, giving you some free damage. Since bash is a separate blockable hit, it can also help to drain the stamina of blocking opponents. The stam drain from block has a cooldown of 0.25 seconds. Now do take note that while it's not stated, conservation of energy does seem to have a 1 second cooldown as demonstrated here. So even though bash and roll will proc it, if you try to bash with or roll cast an ability, it does not proc it twice, as demonstrated here. However, take note that when Werewolf's Rampage ultimate is up, all your standard abilities become free, and therefore they will stop proccing conservation, since free abilities do not satisfy the conditions, as shown here. And that is where bash weaving and roll casting will come in handy, since they are not free and they will now help you proc conservation while your abilities are free. So this isn't confirmed, but I think one of the reasons bash weaving is so strong is because it seems to mess up with abilities queuing up, and you can easily end up macroslicing people, which is when multiple abilities get stuck in queue and go off all at once, visually resulting in an enormous burst to your opponent. Also, Werewolf, especially with status effects, can dish out an enormous number of different hits in a very short time frame. For example, here you can see me land 27 different hits in a span of just 1.5 seconds. Bash weaving definitely contributes to that, and I think registering that many hits so quickly could potentially cause some weird server-side reporting issues that could desync your enemies and make it seem like their HP drops way more than it should from their end. If you've ever been attacked by pulse gankers before, who similarly also land a very large number of hits at once, you'll probably understand roughly what I'm talking about. If I ask you what you think Werewolves Execute is, you'll probably say, well, obviously Rip and Tear. It has 125% execute on its second hit. Anyone getting hit while low is surely gonna die, right? My hot take is that Rip and Tear is a terrible execute. The main issue with this skill is that it's very hard to land the second hit against a low HP enemy. Both hits of Rip and Tear are dodgeable. As seen here, there is a 0.6 second delay between pressing the skill and the second hit registering. 0.6 second is a long time for low HP opponents to avoid it or heal. Not to mention, even the first hit won't be guaranteed to land, since faster opponents will be able to break and roll or block it in time after your fear. The real execute, in my opinion, is Bloodclaws. Bloodclaws delivers an instant, hard-hitting AoE. In fact, even harder than the first hit of Rip and Tear. The natural reaction when someone gets CC'd at low HP is to immediately dodge roll after breaking free. Bloodclaws will kill them right through roll. Not to mention, it also applies a dot if it's not already up, which can tick on them when they are mid-roll and finish them off. Speaking of dots, it is absolutely essential to have Feral Carnage up on someone before you go for a kill, since the damage over time at low HP will hit very hard and often help to finish them off, alongside other dots you have like burning, hemorrhaging, and poison. From experience, most of my finishing hits are either from Bloodclaws or a dot tick, not Rip and Tear. If your opponent is slow, or if you really catch them off guard with a CC, after your fear you can cast Rip and Tear first before following up with Bloodclaws. Here are just some examples of this combo in action. Werewolf's light attack is very unique and much stronger than regular light attacks. It does not have a maximum damage cap. It is also the only light attack in the game that is bleed damage. Regular light attacks do not proc status effects, but Werewolf's light attack is unique and can proc hemorrhaging all by itself, as shown here. One of the upsides of Pack Leader Morph is that you have two direwolves that cannot be targeted and can help you do damage, as well as reduce your transform cost. You can choose a target for them by heavy attacking. Partial heavies work as well, or by using the command pad setting. Holding down the command pad key and light attacking will direct them to your target, while holding it down and pressing block will make them stop. Their damage isn't much. If you evaluate your fights, you will tend to see that they only do about 5% damage at most. But here is why they are so OP. As you can see, their primary attack actually hits twice, so that's 4 hits for 2 wolves. These hits will rapidly drain your enemy's stamina if they are blocking. Keep in mind that block drains stam every 0.25 seconds. They can also proc the standard status effect, which will hit much harder than the wolves themselves, especially with Shattered Path Signal. Also, while their base hits do little, they do benefit from sets like Draw King and Dragon's Appetite, which will actually give them like a 50 to 100% damage increase. So considering the fact that you also have minor courage from Pack Leader, you can see why Pack Leader is so strong, and its damage is actually not that far behind the Berserker Morph. So that concludes my 2-part guide on Werewolf, and I hope you learned something whether or not you are looking forward to the Werewolf changes. In the near future, I'll be uploading some solo PvP gameplay, showcases of specific builds, and also a guide on how to counter Werewolf, which I'm sure is going to be highly necessary next patch. Do check out part 1 of my guide too if you haven't, and if there are any new balance changes, I'll be updating them in the pinned comment. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next video.